Hi, I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. This podcast of the People's Pharmacy is brought to you by Squatty Potty Toilet Stools. They create healthy toilet posture for fast, easy elimination. Learn more about toilet posture and health at squattypotty.com. That's SQUATTYTOTTY.com.
Are you suffering with the flu? Lots of folks are coughing, sneezing, and shivering with fever. What can be done to speed recovery? This is the People's Pharmacy with Terry and Joe Graydon.
After years of indifference, health experts are encouraging people to take antiviral medications such as Tamiflu or Relenza if they come down with influenza. How well do they work? And are there any dangers?
Now that the holidays are over, the bills are coming due. Is that making you nervous? Do you need medication for your stress? Or are there other ways to deal with anxiety?
Coming up on the People's Pharmacy, the health news that matters to you with your calls and questions.
First, this news.
In the People's Pharmacy Health Headlines, the Food and Drug Administration has just announced a restructuring. The agency will be adding a new department, the Office of Pharmaceutical Quality, to rectify some serious manufacturing problems that have come to light over the last decade. Last year, drug recalls affected 70 million drug units. As alarming as that sounds, it's actually an improvement over previous years, when 225 million units were recalled annually. The new Office of Pharmaceutical Quality will pay special attention to extended-release drugs. This is in large part because the agency discovered that some generic forms of Wellbutrin XL300 were not bioequivalent. This discovery has forced the FDA to reconsider its approach to extended-release generic medications.
Consumer demand has led many plastics makers to remove bisphenol A, BPA, from baby bottles and other containers. BPA is an endocrine disruptor that mimics the action of estrogen. Scientists have worried that the compounds used instead of BPA might also carry some risks, but until recently they'd not been tested. Canadian researchers have found that one common substitute, bisphenol S, has similar negative effects on brain development in zebrafish as BPA. The study showed that the fish embryos exposed to very low doses of bisphenol S grew excess neurons and exhibited hyperactive behavior as adults. The possible effects on humans can't be directly extrapolated from the fish research, but the need for more studies is clear. The investigators suggest that pregnant women take the precaution of limiting their exposure to products that contain any type of bisphenol. The findings were published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences.
Blueberries have a reputation as a superfood, and new research confirms that they are indeed special. Nutrition scientists at Florida State University report on a placebo-controlled study that found freeze-dried blueberry powder reduced blood pressure by 5 to 6%. The volunteers were 48 postmenopausal women with elevated blood pressure who were randomly assigned to take 22 grams of blueberry or placebo powder daily for 2 months. The group consuming the blueberry powder also had reduced arterial stiffness. These beneficial effects would be expected in people eating a cup of blueberries daily. Apparently, the berries increase the production of nitric oxide in the blood vessels. Nitric oxide is a natural compound that promotes blood vessel flexibility and dilation. People who consume beets or chocolate also improve their production of nitric oxide.
Researchers at the American Society of Cancer Oncology report that clinical trial participants with newly diagnosed colorectal cancer fared better if they had higher levels of vitamin D. The patients were enrolled in studies of anti-cancer drugs, and their blood levels of 25-hydroxyvitamin D were measured at the beginning of the studies. Those with the lowest levels, around 8 nanograms per ml, survived for an average of 2 years. Those with the highest levels, roughly 27 nanograms, lived an additional 8 months on average. The research does not show that taking extra vitamin D would have an impact on cancer survival, but it has inspired the investigators to start such a study. The benefit of high vitamin D levels held up even after statistical adjustment for physical activity, diet, and obesity.
With the aging of America, investigators are actively seeking ways to prevent or treat Alzheimer's disease. A new study suggests that insulin or an insulin-like compound may improve memory for patients with cognitive impairment or early Alzheimer's disease. Patients were randomized to receive a daily nasal spray with long-lasting insulin detamir or placebo. Those who received the highest dose performed better on tests of memory and cognition. The medication worked especially well for those with the gene ApoE4 that predisposes them to Alzheimer's disease.
Another serious problem of aging is balance. When people become unsteady, they're at much greater risk for falls. A new study shows that playing catch with a medicine ball can improve balance in the elderly. Catching a heavy ball forces the brain to make postural adjustments that may translate to everyday life. People enjoyed this training exercise and appeared to benefit with better balance. And that's the health news from the People's Pharmacy this week. Welcome to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Joe Graydon. I'm a pharmacologist.
And I'm Terry Graydon. I'm a medical anthropologist. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the flu is widespread. It's hitting every state in the nation.
As you've probably heard by now, this year's flu shot is not very effective. This week, the CDC said that the vaccine is roughly 23% effective, suggesting that about 3/4 of those who have gotten their shot could still come down with the flu. And Terry, it is an epidemic, and children are being hit especially hard, as are older people.
That's right. About 3/4 of the deaths that have occurred so far are in those over 65. Well, have you had the flu, or are you suffering right now? Did you get your shot? And how long did your arm hurt? We'd like to hear from you. The number to call for you to join the conversation is 888-472-3366. You can also email us, radio@peoplespharmacy.com, or you can send us a message by way of Twitter. We're at People's Pharmacy. Again, to join the conversation, the number is 888-472-3366.
Terry, I was fascinated to read this past week that Dr. Tom Frieden, who is director of the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, Dr. Frieden said that it's more important than usual that high-risk patients get antiviral drugs. He said, that's going to keep people out of the ICU, and the direct quote, antiviral flu medicines save lives.
Well, this is kind of new from the CDC because although antiviral drugs have been around against flu for, more than 30 years?
Exactly.
They have, to a large extent, been ignored by the medical establishment, which is CDC.
Well, there's been a lot of resistance. The idea that there were actually oral antiviral medicines against influenza, I think a lot of health professionals just didn't believe it, or they resisted it. The first one was amantadine, Simitrel. It's been prescribed for years, decades even, for Parkinson's.
In fact, it was first approved by FDA as a flu drug, but it was approved only for a very specific strain of influenza A, even though it works broadly against influenza A's. Now, it doesn't work broadly against most of them anymore because it was used in other countries, and the flu virus developed resistance.
Exactly. Then along came rimantadine, a chemical cousin of amantadine. They had a really cool brand name. It was Flumidine, but it never really caught on.
And again, it was actually used pretty widely in Asia, and flu bugs developed resistance. I think that might be part of why epidemiologists and public health people have been cautious about encouraging people to take antiviral drugs for the flu.
But now we have Tamiflu, we have Relenza, and there's a brand new one. It's injectable. What's it called?
Rapivab.
And
but it's really, because it's a single injection, but it It really is for people who come down with the flu while they're in the hospital.
Exactly. But, hearing from the CDC, prescribe antivirals, that's sort of, not new. They have recommended it in past years, but now they're enthusiastic.
And that is unusual.
888-472-3366 is the phone number to call if you'd like to join the conversation. We'd like to hear from you if you're suffering the flu, if you got a flu shot, if it worked. Let us hear from you. Let us hear your story. Let's go almost to the phones. We're not quite ready to do that yet, but we look forward to your call.
Now, Joe, of course, getting a prescription for that antiviral medication, if you come down with the flu, that can be tricky.
That rant alert. Okay. So, here we have.
Make it quick.
I'll make it quick. Here we have the head of the CDC saying, get your antiviral medicine, get your Tamiflu. It's taken orally. But a lot of doctors are very reluctant to prescribe it ahead of time. So they say, well, we're not going to prescribe Tamiflu or Relenza until you come down with the flu. But we won't really know if you've come down with the flu unless you come into the office and you have a flu test. Well, it could take you a week to 2 weeks to get an appointment these days because everybody's so darn sick. And if you can't get the prescription within 24 to 48 hours, it's not going to work. Yesterday, we heard that the CDC was actually encouraging doctors to call in a prescription for Tamiflu, even if they don't see the patient directly. I wonder if doctors will do that.
Well, I'm looking forward to having a rapid flu test available for people to use at home so they'll know whether they have flu or just some kind of flu-like illness. Let's turn to the phones. In Wilmington, North Carolina, Dr. Bennett, welcome to the People's Pharmacy.
Welcome. I got a flu shot, and my arm did not hurt. And as you can hear, I'm going through the end of the flu now.
Yeah, you sound terrible.
You do sound like you came down with it.
It was short-lived. I think, can't say the rest of the family does not have it. They did not get flu shots. I'm obliged to get a flu shot working in the hospital.
Uh-huh.
We hear this over and over again that a lot of hospitals have said the only way you're going to work in our institution is to get a flu shot. And I kind of understand that because we don't want patients exposed to influenza from their physician. But in your case, you got the shot, you got sick. The rest of your family, you say, didn't get the shot and somehow avoided the flu?
They did not get sick yet.
Well, let's hope they don't.
We'll keep our fingers crossed. Dr. Bennett, thank you so much for calling, and we're glad you didn't get a sore arm. We heard from someone just this past week that this individual got the quadrivalent. That's the four strains in one.
And his arm was still sore 7 weeks later. He said, it still feels like I got that shot yesterday or the day before.
So that's why we were asking, has anyone else had an experience with a sore arm?
Joe, even though the flu vaccine this year is particularly unlikely to be super effective, people overestimate its effectiveness every year.
Well, I think a lot of people assume that if they get the flu shot, they'll have 100% protection. Well, maybe not 100, but 80 or 90%. Turns out that in good years, it may only be about 60 to 70% effective. And in a year like this where there's drift, mutation, it may only work in about a quarter of the cases, if that.
888-472-3366. Anthony in Augusta, Georgia, welcome to the People's Pharmacy. What's on your mind?
Welcome, Joe and Terry. What's on my mind is the outbreak here in the Aiken, Augusta area isn't as bad as it was 2 years ago when well over 50% of the workforce was out where I work. Through December, January. It was at least a 2-month period, and they were out a protracted period of time. I think it's important because I try to tell people how the formulation and the strains are picked. That scientists go out, trap birds, and fecal samples and see what virus is occurring in the population, and that's how they formulate. And that, people are, well, then why doesn't it work? Well, mutations, as Joe said, mutations occur And that's not a reason not to get vaccinated, because if the strain reoccurs, you're still protected.
You know, you're lucky in Georgia because Georgia is one of the few states that hasn't been slammed this year with the flu, but you may not be so lucky next week. So let's keep our fingers crossed that Georgia does well.
We hope you will be.
But my shots, it didn't hurt, so.
Oh, good.
Well, we hope you're protected. So thank you so much for calling, Anthony.
And Anthony is right. They do have to make educated guesses about which flu strains will be predominant, and they have to make those guesses far ahead of when the flu actually starts to hit.
Well, you know, one of the symptoms that people suffer with when it comes to the flu is a cough. And what to do when the cough is really keeping you awake at night? It turns out that cough medicine that contains dextromethorphan is not all that effective. People keep telling us these home remedies are amazing. Vicks Vapor Rub on the soles of the feet, or perhaps thyme tea, Thyme, and a little honey.
Some people like turmeric in hot milk. Joe, we've got one more call about flu. Shall we?
Let's go to Charleston, South Carolina. Joseph, welcome to the People's Pharmacy. We understand you're a physician as well.
Oh, hi, Joe and Terry. I listen to your program all the time and really enjoy it. Thank you so much for delving into these topics. There's so much to say. You can cut me off when it's too much.
Well, we only have a minute before the break,
right.
So give us something short.
What I would say is that I'm an infectious disease physician. I've been caring for flu for many years. I remember getting Asian flu way back when, and if people would read about what flu is really like, we'll really know how much we can ameliorate our current epidemics that we're having. I think the main thing to say from my point of view is it's a very complex disease. Anything we can do for it, even if these antivirals have only a mild effect, is worth it. And you pointed out a lot of the complexities, but I think the main thing is from the CDC, they do put out a very complex brochure at the beginning of the year that takes a lot of delving into to understand.
Well, let me ask you this, Dr. Joseph. If you got a call from one of your patients, and that patient said, Dr. Joseph, I am so sick. I just came down with the flu yesterday, and I've got a fever of 102, and I'm coughing, and I've got shivers, and I'm sure it's the flu. Would you prescribe Tamiflu over the phone?
Oh, absolutely, I would. But I also would probably want to see the patient or have the patient examined. I think one of the main things here is that secondary bacterial pneumonias are the main killers in this disease, particularly of the older and the younger people.
Of course, it's one thing to say, I'd like to see that patient, but I bet your office is jammed full.
Well, it can be. It doesn't mean they're primary care physician. I'm a specialist in infectious diseases, so they're not going to end up in my particular office necessarily. Right. But to be seen is very important because one other major point is influenza is a systemic disease. You're going to have virus even in your muscle and in many of your other organs, just not your respiratory tract.
Dr. Joseph, we have to take a break, but thank you so much for your call. When we come back, we're going to be talking about anxiety. Is the weather making you stir crazy, or are the post-holiday bills making you hyperventilate? We'll find out how to manage anxiety without medications.
You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon.
If you like the information you hear when you listen to The People's Pharmacy, you may also enjoy our book published by National Geographic. It's The People's Pharmacy Quick and Handy Home Remedies, available online at peoplespharmacy.com or at your favorite bookstore.
Welcome back to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Terry Graydon.
And I'm Joe Graydon. The People's Pharmacy is made possible by Redix Industries, makers of utterly smooth creams and lotions that moisturize deeply to make dry skin feel soft and smooth. 800-345-7339. Online at uttercream.com.
And by Squatty Potty Toilet Step Stools, creating healthy toilet posture for fast, easy elimination. More information about how toilet posture affects your health at Squatty Potty. peoplespharmacy.com.
If you'd like to order a CD of this show, you can call 800-732-2334. Today's show number 977. You'll also find it online at peoplespharmacy.com.
Today we're talking about the health headlines that matter to you. If talking about the flu makes you anxious, we have the antidote. For a discussion of non-drug approaches to dealing with anxiety, we turn to Dr. Steve Alardi, Associate Professor of Clinical Psychology at the University of Kansas and author of The Depression Cure, the 6-step program to beat depression without drugs. He joins us from the studio of KANU.
Welcome to the People's Pharmacy, Dr. Steve Alardi.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be joining you.
Dr. Alardi, there's a condition that's maybe even more common than depression, and that's anxiety. Now, I think everybody knows what it feels like to be anxious. You know, that the blue light or the red light from the police car behind you, instant anxiety. Was I really speeding? Did I go through that red light? We're going to have that shot of adrenaline, but we're not talking about an acute anxiety attack. We're talking about chronic anxiety. What is it? What causes it? How does it manifest itself?
Yeah, well, I mean, at the simplest level, anxiety is something that we need, right? Without it, probably most of us would have long since perished. Anxiety is the brain's and the body's signal to us that there's some potential threat that's looming. When we see the flashing lights in our rear view, there's a real threat there, right? Or at least often there is. If we're out hiking in the woods and we hear some low growling sound and rustling in the bushes, there may be a threat. So anxiety prepares our body for vigorous activity. We've often heard of it as the fight or flight response. The threat hasn't necessarily materialized, but it's out there. And so we've upgraded our risk assessment. When it occurs in context of genuine danger or potential danger, it's completely adaptive. It can help save our lives. The problem is when it becomes a clinical issue is when somebody's getting that signal and it's a false signal. Their brain, their body is telling them there's threat everywhere, and it begins to affect their thinking, so they become hypervigilant for any sort of cue of danger, and they start misinterpreting things that are completely neutral or benign, but in their brain, in their minds, those are signals that just amplify that perception of threat, and so they're on that full alert all the time. And over time, it's devastating. It's painful emotionally, it's harmful to the body, and ultimately it can lead to pretty significant and debilitating mental illness.
How is it usually treated? What is the best treatment?
Well, it varies a bit. I know that sounds a little bit like what you'd expect a professor to say, but there are 7 different major anxiety disorders, and it turns out that the optimal treatment tends to vary a bit based on what the type of anxiety is. So, for example, if people are wondering, we have anxiety disorders like obsessive compulsive disorder, which involves compulsive rituals, intrusive obsessional thoughts. We have disorders like post-traumatic stress, once a person has experienced a very severe trauma. We have panic attacks where the person's alarm response or fight or flight response is going full tilt out of the blue repeatedly. We have phobias, people that have irrational fears of snakes and spiders and heights and any number of things. So, if I could generalize just a bit, the cardinal rule of anxiety is the following: exposure makes it better and avoidance makes it worse. When the brain is giving us this false signal that something is threatening, there's no way to talk ourselves out of it, because it's coming from very primal circuits deep in the brain areas that many listeners have probably heard of, like the amygdala, like the hypothalamus, like the hippocampus. And they are designed to give us a very intuitive sort of automatic sense of, hey, something dangerous is probably about to happen. And so we're not going to talk our way out of it. But I'll give you an example. If, I had a patient who had a phobia of snakes. And when she was forced to, at first, she would get trembly and really, truly uncomfortably anxious just looking at a cartoon drawing of a snake. But as she was exposed, she was forced to sit and look at that cartoon drawing and then eventually even to touch it. And she rated her anxiety initially at about a 7 out of 10. In other words, she was very uncomfortable. Within 20 minutes, she was down to a 2 out of 10. Within 30 minutes, she was down to a 0. And then we worked our way up to exposure to actual photographs of snakes, first little garter snakes and then cobras. And then it was off to the pet store to have exposure to real snakes. And within a couple weeks, it was actually holding a python. So when we do very systematic gradual exposure like that, we're giving the brain corrective information. We're not, giving it rational information. We're basically saying, look, you're in a situation that you regard as dangerous, and after 20, 30 minutes, nothing bad has happened. So it's time to downgrade your threat assessment. And that's what the brain does.
And you're telling me that this patient was actually able to hold a python after such anxiety associated with snakes?
Absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, one of my all-time heroes as a clinical researcher in the field, he's a Swedish psychologist. His name is Goran Erst, O-S-T, with a little umlaut over the O. And he has actually developed a 3-hour single-session exposure-based protocol for specific phobias like snake phobia, spider phobia, water phobia. And for a patient who is sufficiently motivated, in one 3-hour session, he can take them from the very bottom of their fear hierarchy, like in this case, maybe looking at a cartoon drawing, all the way up to the very top of it, holding the snake. I've seen it with my own eyes, and it is absolutely mind-blowing.
Now, let's talk about traditional medications against anxiety for a moment, if you don't mind.
Sure.
When I was starting out in pharmacology, we had barbiturates, phenobarb, pentobarb, thiopental, secobarb, seconal. And, they were sort of the one-stop shopping for anxiety. And then, of course, we learned that people could overdose and actually commit suicide with these drugs, so they lost favor. Along came the second generation, the meprobamates, the Miltowns, for example. And then it wasn't too long after that before we had the benzodiazepines, starting with drugs like Librium and then Valium and then Xanax. And they became very, very popular with physicians because it was much harder to commit suicide on them. But how effective are these drugs, whether they were barbiturates or whether they are the benzos, against anxiety?
Well, there's a really interesting paradox that happens with the benzodiazepines, and I'm going to focus on them if it's okay, because the last published analysis of psychiatric drugs in the U.S. said that a benzodiazepine, it's called Xanax, or alprazolam is the generic, the number one most prescribed psychiatric medication in the U.S. Number one. These medications are extremely effective in the short term for most people. And what I mean by that is virtually everyone, well over 90% of patients who are feeling anxiety, if they take a benzo like Xanax, Ativan, Klonopin, Valium, in the short term, and they're very quick in their onset of action, within an hour or less, they're going to be feeling less anxious. Just like, by the way, they could drink a sufficient dose of alcohol and be feeling less anxious very quickly. Alcohol is a pretty potent anxiolytic medication, but like alcohol, the benzodiazepines tend to lose their effectiveness somewhat over time. Anytime we throw anything at the brain pharmacologically, day after day after day, the brain is going to adapt. The way I put it to my undergraduates is the brain is going to push back. It has all sorts of adaptive compensatory mechanisms. If it gets used to the benzodiazepine, sitting there on receptors, they're called GABA receptors, that basically have an inhibitory effect on brain signaling in lots of different circuits. Anytime the brain is seeing that day after day, it's going to try to compensate for it. And in the case of benzos, it doesn't take that long. Often within 4 to 6 weeks, the person is now back to their original baseline. In other words, for the first week or two, they were getting an amazing, wonderful, helpful effect. 4 to 6 weeks out, now they're back to where they started, except actually they're much worse, because not only are they right back where they started, but they've got side effects, and if they ever miss a dose, if they ever don't take it that day, then they're going to be feeling a lot worse than they felt before.
So they have a nasty withdrawal effect.
we often see withdrawal that can set in with benzos in as quickly as 4 to 6 weeks, which is absolutely incredible to me. And certainly when patients have been taking these drugs at a higher dosage for months and months, sometimes years and years at a time, the risk of withdrawal is quite high. And by the way, it can be quite dangerous. If somebody quits cold turkey after years on a benzo, or even sometimes months, they can actually go into convulsive seizures. And not to be alarmist in any way, but I've certainly seen anecdotal reports of polysubstance users. So these are individuals who are daily using benzos on top of, say, heroin or cocaine. They'll talk about as they got clean and withdrew from one drug at a time, it was easier to get off of heroin than it was to get off of Xanax.
Dr. Ilardi, what can someone do then to manage chronic anxiety?
Well, by far, I think the best evidence-based treatment that we have is a form of psychotherapy. Many people have heard of it. It's called CBT, or cognitive behavioral therapy. And it's a really nice short-term protocol to do some of the things we've talked about already, which has to do with exposure to the things that we fear in a very gentle, gradual sense, but also to look at the thoughts that drive anxiety. We talked about overestimating threat. We've talked about some of the negative bias in thinking. And it turns out that over time, as a person gets better at identifying those thoughts and replacing them with less distorted thoughts, that can make a difference. The other thing that I would say is the way we live our life. Just like it affects depression, it can also affect anxiety. It turns out that omega-3 supplements have an anti-anxiety effect. It turns out that many of us, it's been estimated up to 70% of Americans don't get enough of a mineral called magnesium in their diet. And one of the really exciting recent findings is that correcting magnesium deficiency often has a rather profound anti-anxiety effect. It can also help with sleep onset, so people who have trouble falling asleep. It can also help for many of us who have chronic muscle cramping and tightness. It's even a really nice laxative for many, although you have to be careful about the dosing because too much of a good thing can be not such a good thing.
So, Dr. Ilardi, for someone who does feel a sense of chronic anxiety, kind of feels under tremendous stress, or maybe deadlines at work, relationship issues at home, is CBT the answer? Are there other things that people should be doing?
Well, I'll tell you the one that many of your listeners have heard about because it is red hot in the world of clinical research, and that has to do with a set of techniques called mindfulness, sometimes referred to as mindfulness meditation. And it sounds a little bit mysterious and mystical. It's very simple, very straightforward, and it's been found to have profound effects on the brain's anxiety circuitry. And mindfulness meditation, as little as 15, 20 minutes a day, I can tell you for many, many patients that I've spoken with, it has been transformative. It has been life-changing, especially for those who battle chronic rumination that's threat-related, that battle a chronic sense of things are going to go very, very badly. It absolutely changes their quality of life for the better in a way for many of them that no medication ever has.
Dr. Steve Ilardi, we want to thank you very much for talking with us on the People's Pharmacy today.
Thank you so much, Terry. It's been my pleasure.
You've been listening to Dr. Steve Ilardi, Associate Professor of Clinical Psychology at the University of Kansas. His book is The Depression Cure, the 6-step program to beat depression without drugs.
Have you had experience dealing with anxiety? Have you taken alprazolam or lorazepam? Tell us about it at 888-472-3366 or send us an email, radio@peoplespharmacy.com. You can also reach us by way of Twitter. We're at People's Pharmacy.
You know, Terry, I think a lot of people assume that the benzos have, relatively benign. Valium comes to mind. I mean, millions of people have taken Valium over the years. These days, alprazolam, as Dr. Ilardi said, is probably the most popular psychoactive drug at 50 million prescriptions per year, and that doesn't take into account clonazepam, lorazepam, or temazepam. So we'd love to hear from you. Have you taken these medications? Have you had any trouble getting off them? Give us a call, 472-3366.
We have an email from Ira, who is in a pickle, Joe. Ira writes, I'm 65, exercise by cycling 12 miles at least 6 times a week, and I'm otherwise healthy. I have anxiety and repetitive obsessive thoughts after I wake to urinate between 4 and 6 in the morning. It's sometimes impossible to fall asleep again. I know how to meditate. I've had biofeedback training. Sometimes I can deep breathe and count down from 100 all the way to 1 and still be restless. On rare occasions, I take Zolpidem, but that doesn't work either. So, any ideas? He really has thrown us a difficult one, hasn't he?
It's a challenge, and I would say find a cognitive behavioral therapist who can come up with some strategies for what to do at 4 a.m.
Right, especially for those repetitive, obsessive ideas.
One of the things that's a little alarming comes from a journal article in BMJ, formerly the British Medical Journal. It was online September 10th, 2014. They found a link between benzodiazepines and an increased risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. The longer people took the benzodiazepines, the greater their risk. And so that's a dose-response curve.
Yeah, that is pretty
scary. So, we're not suggesting that this is cause and effect. At this point, it's merely an association, but it is a little worrisome.
But it does suggest that if you need to use a benzodiazepine, you should use it for the shortest amount of time you possibly can. And that suggests, Joe, that you'll have to get off it. How do you do that?
Slowly, very, very slowly. The symptoms of withdrawal that Dr. Ilardi was referring to include, guess what? Anxiety, irritability. Some people say, I just can't think. I've got fuzzy brain. Sometimes people experience panic, insomnia, depression, sweating, and even muscle twitching. So I think it's really important that you don't stop a drug like alprazolam or lorazepam suddenly. The withdrawal can be unbearable. That's why you really need to be under medical supervision when it comes time to discontinue such medication.
Right. And unfortunately, doctors also need a little more support, a little more help in being able to help their patients taper down gradually enough.
And that also applies to antidepressants. Drugs like Paxil or Zoloft, you can't stop them suddenly either. The withdrawal symptoms can be quite devastating. Well, that music means we need to take a short break, but when we come back, we're going to talk about vitamin D. How much do you need? We'd like to hear from you. Do you take vitamin D or other supplements? How well does it work? Give us a call, 888-472-3366. Email us, radio@peoplespharmacy.com.
You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon. If you value the health information you get when you listen to The People's Pharmacy, consider subscribing to our email newsletter. You'll get the latest health news and information on upcoming podcasts delivered to your inbox twice a week. Look for the link at peoplespharmacy.com. Welcome back to The People's Pharmacy. I'm Terry Graydon.
And I'm Joe Graydon. The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by Red-X Industries, makers of utterly smooth creams and lotions, helping dry, cracked feet, and skin feel utterly soft and smooth. The number's 800-345-7339, online at uttercream.com.
And by Squatty Potty Toilet Step Stools, creating healthy toilet posture for fast, easy elimination. More information about how toilet posture affects your health at squattypotty.com.
You can purchase a CD of this show. Just call 800-732-2334. Today's show, number 977, or find it online at peoplespharmacy.com.
Today, we're talking about the stories behind the health headlines. Bisphenol A, that's BPA, has gotten a lot of attention as an endocrine disruptor. A lot of consumers have complained and looked for products without BPA, and manufacturers have responded. You'll find quite a few BPA-free plastic water bottles and baby bottles and so forth. But are the BPA-free plastics, are they really safer?
Well, there's a new study out of Canada, and it suggests that one of the replacements is something called bisphenol S, BPS instead of BPA, and people had assumed that it was perfectly safe. But what they did is they looked at zebrafish embryos.
Now, scientists often use zebrafish as a model of looking at how compounds affect development.
And what they found was surprising because they used very low, in fact, the investigators said very, very, very low doses of bisphenol S, about the amount that you would find in some of the water supplies. They were absolutely flabbergasted that they could find changes in brain development in zebrafish that caused the zebrafish to become hyperactive. So the question now becomes one of, well, what is a bisphenol-free plastic, and is it safe? And the answer now is, well, maybe, maybe not. So it's posing a bit of a question.
It is posing a question. Of course, the American Chemistry Council says not to worry. These are fish. They have nothing to do with people. We're not so sure. But obviously there will need to be some follow-up research.
The other major story this week has to do with vitamin D. We've been hearing a lot about vitamin D, Terry, and how it may protect against a number of conditions, but we haven't known the mechanism. And now there's a study out that suggests that vitamin D protects against colorectal cancer, and it does that by actually boosting the immune system, something that grandmothers in Scandinavia have probably known for a very long time. They just didn't know what the mechanism was.
They didn't know the mechanism. What they knew was that cod liver oil would help keep people from getting sick during the wintertime.
Well, speaking of vitamin D, we go to Tammy in Fort Worth, Texas. Tammy, welcome to the People's Pharmacy. Tell us about your experience with vitamin D.
Hi, I had a blood workup, just a yearly blood workup with my doctor, and he saw that I had a vitamin D deficiency, so he recommended that I just get a supplement over the counter. So I take vitamin D3, 5,000 IU a day.
Great.
And I just find that I'm really and truly, I've got a couple of shortages in my blood. I have type O negative, and I have a little bit less energy. And I work inside, so I don't get outside a whole lot during the day. And from what I've read, a majority of people do have a vitamin D deficiency.
There's a fair amount of controversy, Tammy, about what exactly constitutes a deficiency and what is an inadequacy. So doctors like to argue about these fine points. But basically, you're right. A lot of people do not have enough vitamin D, particularly in the wintertime. I'm not sure about Fort Worth, but I think it might even be a little too far north to be able to make vitamin D, even if you went outside with very little on in this time of year.
I'm guessing you're not going out in shorts and a T-shirt today.
Correct. We have had extremely cold weather for this part of the country thus far this season, but it's in the upper 60s yesterday and supposedly today, but I'll be inside. Well, I'll be outside at my son's ranch this afternoon. Actually.
Well, maybe you will get a little extra vitamin D. Now, the only big controversy is how much is enough.
Okay, right.
And, 5,000 international units is considered by some people on the high side. So the best way of knowing if you're getting enough or if you're getting too much is a blood test. And your doctor can do that, every 6 months or so and measure 25 hydroxy vitamin D. And that will tell you.
Exactly right. That way you'll know whether the dose you're taking is correct for you. And it turns out that different people need different amounts of vitamin D. There are differences in our genes, what we call polymorphisms, common variants in genes that have a profound effect on how well we make vitamin D when sunlight hits our skin.
Thank you so much for the call, Tammy.
Sure, not a problem. Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye-bye. 888-472-3366 is the number to call. Anything that's on your mind with regard to health concerns, whether it be bisphenol A in plastic, whether it be vitamin D, or if you've had experience with a cough remedy, we'd love to hear about it. Have you tried Vicks Vapor Rub on the soles of your feet with a nasty nighttime cough, and did it work? What about Time Tea? That's one of my favorites. But if Robitussin works for you, let us know. Give us a call. 888-472-3366 is the number to call. Our lines are open for your questions, your calls, as well as your stories. Now, Terry, I have to tell you that there is a new study out that really grabbed my attention. This came from Rush University Medical Center in Chicago, Illinois. 2 studies, in fact, by the same team, back-to-back, in the Journal of Clinical Investigation and the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism, and it has to do with something you're very interested in, and that is thyroid function.
Well, speaking of polymorphisms, it turns out that there are some genetic differences in people when it comes to thyroid.
Surprise. I think a lot of physicians, if not most physicians, have worked under the assumption that if you just give people what's called T4, that's levothyroxine.
Also known by the brand name Synthroid.
And levothyroid and unithroid, that if you just give people levothyroxine, they will convert it to the active form, which is T3. And so everything will be fine and dandy, and you'll just measure their TSH levels, and no worries. If you can get it in the right range, everything will be fine. Well, what they found is a substantial number of people, perhaps as many as 15%, don't do very well on T4, on levothyroxine. And it turns out a fair number of people do not convert T4 to the active form T3, triiodothyronine, easily. And these people feel way better if they get both T4 and T3.
And we've suspected for quite some time that there was a basis for that because we have been hearing from people. It seems like a majority of people do fine on T4 alone, but there's a significant minority that really needs that additional T3 in order to feel good. Do we have any idea how many people are affected, Joe?
It may be as many as a third. So maybe 18% to a third. And therefore, doctors may not necessarily have to rely just on TSH. They may have to look at free T3.
Or listen to the patient's report on their symptoms.
They're feeling.
And unfortunately, with thyroid symptoms, they're so general, it's really hard to pin down the exact cause.
But I hope the skeptics will take a look at this research from Rush University Medical Center in Chicago. It's really fascinating, and the lead author to look for is Bianco. Dr. Bianco, he has co-chaired the American Thyroid Association Task Force. He is a heavy hitter in the field of endocrinology. Shall we go back to the phones?
Let's talk to William in Middleton, Wisconsin. William, welcome to the People's Pharmacy.
Yes, thank you for taking my call. For hundreds and hundreds of years, the people in Finland and northern Russia did not get cod liver oil from ocean fish, which livers have lots of cod liver oil. They only ate freshwater fish, which livers have very little cod liver oil.
Right.
Or vitamin D. So what they did is they took mushrooms, placed them in the sun in the fall. It's a great sport to collect mushrooms. Let the sun's rays go into the mushrooms, and the pre-vitamin D inside the mushrooms would be converted to vitamin D, and the people all went along, ate mushrooms, and got their vitamin D.
William, that is terrific, and I happen to know that it's right. And it's a great story as well.
kid you.
No, we know you would not do that, William. But, Terry, there is some new research suggesting that people who eat mushrooms actually have better vitamin D levels.
Well, right, that's what William is saying. And he's saying that the grandmothers in Finland and northern Russia knew this. And they didn't have access to the ocean being inland, and so they had a different way of getting their vitamin D during the wintertime.
So the old wives were right after all. We've heard this many times. Let's go to Tammy in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Hi, Tammy.
Hi, Joe and Terry. I just wanted to mention I was having horrible musculoskeletal issues. I thought I might have fibromyalgia, and I had went to the doctor after years of putting it off, and they took a vitamin D test, and they said that I was normal, but the low end of normal. Normal was 30 to 100. I was 30.5.
Uh-huh.
And they suggested that I start taking some vitamin D. So I take 4,000 a day, and my musculoskeletal pain has disappeared completely.
Tammy, thank you so much for sharing that with us. It is a story we have heard before, but I think it's not adequately appreciated that too little vitamin D, even if it's not really deficient, can sometimes contribute to that kind of pain.
You know, Terry, this is especially important for older people because if older people, develop aches and pains, they go, oh, well, it must be I'm getting older.
It's arthritis, I'm getting older.
And
yeah.
in addition, they may be a little bit unsteady on their feet. And,
And vitamin D makes a huge difference for that as well. It really, having adequate vitamin D on board can really cut the risk of a fall. Tammy, thanks so much for that call.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Joe, William was talking about vitamin D and mushrooms, and we just got a tweet from Laura who says, have you seen this TED Talk on mushrooms' effect on the flu? Apparently somebody gave a TED Talk on 6 ways mushrooms can save the world. It was mycologist Paul Stamets, and evidently mushrooms can also help against the flu. Who knew?
Well, it makes total sense because if mushrooms are in fact boosting your vitamin D levels and vitamin D has an immune stimulating effect, why not be beneficial? And what's more, we love mushrooms. Mushrooms are very tasty, so eat more mushrooms. What a great idea. Let's go right back to the phones, Terry, and go to Hartsville, South Carolina. Hi, Nancy. What's on your mind?
Hi, Terry. And Dave, I was wondering about the benefits of DHA. I've been hearing a lot of stuff about that.
DHA, which is
hexanoic acid. There's EPA.
Yes.
Icosapentaenoic acid.
And
DHA.
Docosahexaenoic acid.
So basically, these are the 2 primary ingredients in fish oil.
So they are long-chain fatty acids, and they are, in fact, very helpful, as far as we know, for the heart, for the brain. The problems come when you try to take them as if they were drugs. The research doesn't necessarily hold up in terms of being able to take this as a drug and prevent, for example, a heart arrhythmia. It doesn't necessarily hold up that you can take it as a drug and prevent Alzheimer's disease. But the epidemiology shows that people who eat a lot of fish, generally speaking, are less prone to those problems.
So, Nancy, we kind of agree with a lot of health professionals who say, eat fish. Okay?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. And let's go to Sandy in Cleveland. Is that Wisconsin?
Yes, that's correct.
What's on your mind, Sandy?
Oh, hello. I'm just calling. In my late 40s, I had started to have stomach problems, and I went to more of a gluten-free diet because it severely affected my immune system. I was just totally exhausted all the time. And they did all kinds of tests. Obviously, could not figure out what was wrong. But changing my diet, it helped. But I tried every vitamin. I've always eaten vitamins or taken vitamins. And I tried a supplement. It's a fermented powder whole food supplement that had a probiotic and enzyme in it. And I don't know if it's psychological that this stuff my immune system just is off the charts, and I have more energy than I've ever had. And I don't know if it's because I absorb it better because it's a powdered whole food, or if, there's something special about it. But I don't think I've ever taken a supplement that would make me feel as good as this stuff does.
Well, you know what's so interesting, Sandy, is that there is actually some research to suggest that probiotics do boost the immune system.
And moreover, there's some brand new research showing that probiotics can lower blood pressure. So probiotics, depending on the specific strain of probiotic, can actually have a wide range of health benefits. And while we're talking about supplements, Joe, I just wanted to mention this interesting research on epigallocatechin 3 gallate, which is the stuff in green tea. It has been tested in a small number, but double-blind, placebo-controlled, et cetera, a small number of people with relapsing, remitting multiple sclerosis, and it helps improve energy efficiency and muscle power in men, not so much in women. So isn't that interesting that there's this gender difference for green tea?
Yes, more relevant research on green tea. We love it. Terry, I did get an email at last with regard to Vicks Vapor Rub on the soles of the feet. This person says, we swear by this remedy. We're a family of science-oriented Western medicine people. But out of desperation, I tried this when my daughter was young and sick with a terrible cough. Within 15 minutes, her cough was gone. We've now used it for years, and it has never once failed to stop a cough in its tracks. We've used it during the day many times as well with equal success. The smell can be a bit much, but in an emergency, we use it. And I think everybody who's ever had any contact with Vicks Vapor Rub will remember that smell.
I certainly will. It's extremely distinctive. Some people really like it. Some people really hate it. But most people aren't neutral. Joe, we do have an email from Grafton who says, I heard vitamin D needs to be taken with food high in fat or it won't be absorbed. Is that true? The answer is probably you'll be able to absorb your vitamin D, but it'll be absorbed better with food high in fat because it is a fat-soluble vitamin.
That's all the time we have. Thank you so much for listening to The People's Pharmacy. Lynn Siegel produced today's show. Sophie Copeland provided technical assistance. Al Wadarski is the engineer. Dave Graydon edits our interviews.
The People's Pharmacy is produced at the studios of North Carolina Public Radio, WUNC.
The People's Pharmacy theme music is by B.J. Liederman.
If you'd like to order today's show, the number is 800-732-2334. The show is numbered 977. That number again, 800-732-2334.
In Durham, North Carolina, I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. Thanks for listening, and please join us again next week. We'll be talking with Dr. Rob Abel about the eye care revolution.
We hope you enjoyed this podcast. If so, please consider taking a minute to write a review on iTunes. And thanks for listening to The People's Pharmacy.